Hi everyone, welcome to the Angels Block of the Month video. Today we're going to be just talking about tools in a 1/4 inch seam. And it may sound like this is like a commercial, but for me it's really not. It's about having the right tools to get the job done the best you can, the easiest way, and having the right tools is going to make a difference. And I know a lot of you probably have most, or if not all, of these tools. I always have the smaller rotary cutter. I think it's 28 millimeters, because I don't need a great big rotary cutter to cut a single piece or an edge that I'm squaring up. For me personally, I have better control and get into less trouble with my little rotary cutter and having a smaller ruler. You don't need that great big giant ruler for everything you do, because the bigger the ruler, the harder it is to control, and the same with the rotary cutter. So I'm just going to set those aside. Pins, you always want to have pins. These particular pins, I think they're called the magic pins, and that shows you what kind of salesman I am. I'm not sure. But these are heat resistant. So if you need to press something while it's pinned for whatever reason, and it will come up, you're not going to be melting your pins. Plus it has a nice grip, and this size is fairly long, and it's the one with the blue. Each size has a different color top. I can't remember if these are 1.5 or 2, but it's a good size to have. Of course, seam ripper. And if you need to update your seam ripper every now and again, it has a blade in it just like anything else, so do that. A pair of thread snips, and this is the one I use. These are Floriani. There's different brands that the store can show you, and these are my thread snips. And I say that thread snips, thread snips, thread snips. Don't use them for anything else. If you start cutting fabric with them, these blades will eventually just be apart a tad, enough that every time you go to snip your threads, you'll be all irritated because you got to do it about 10 times. So whatever type of snips or little scissors you like to use for your thread, really, really work hard. And I have the same problem also at not going, oh, I'm just going to cut this one little thing. Just try to really hard not to use them for anything but thread. When I sew quilting blocks, piecing blocks, I use a Microtex 7010. I don't need a 9014. That just makes a big hole. It makes your seam allowance off a little bit. So if you're trying to get the right seam allowance, you know, your 1/4 inch seam allowance, use a 7010 Microtex. A Microtex needle is sharper than a universal needle. Universal needle, the end is a little dull, so it can be used universally. That means on a lot of different fabrics. And you know, I go on about having your wooden roller to press your seams while you're putting your block pieces together, because you really don't want to iron until your block is all done. And I think you've seen enough videos of me rambling on about that. Thread, decent thread. Not if it's a wooden spool. Don't try to tell me you bought it last week, okay? Because I've had that happen. So this is Metler. My two colors that I use the most is like an off-white, light beige, and a medium gray, and I also keep a darker gray. These are great neutral threads for when you're doing quilt blocks, because quilt block fabrics, when you're making your quilt blocks, it's never going to be all blue or all red or anything like that. So you want a good neutral color, and these also come in the bigger spools, which is way more cost effective. So good thread, okay? Not the stuff that's $1 or 5 for $1, or, you know, out of your grandmother's sewing basket. Do something else with those. Like give them to give them to somebody that doesn't sew, and they'll never know the difference. No, I'm just kidding. So you really want good thread. The other thing is you need to get your 1/4 inch seam allowance. So this is Can you see it has a little guide, 1/4-inch foot with the guide, and that little guide is going to run along the edge of your fabric to give you your 1/4-inch seam. Okay, if you have, let me see, I think I might have one. If you have an older machine that has a metal plate, you can use one of these that just snaps on here with the magnet, and your fabric would run along that. So if you check with the store, there's little stick down things that you can use. There's several different ways to mark to help you keep a 1/4-inch seam. And let's see, I'm going to say that if you mention the block of the month, any of these tools will be on sale at Angel's. I guess I better let them know. Just kidding. Okay, but they will. They'll give you some kind of special pricing on whatever you need to have the right tools for the job. So I'm going to go ahead and put on my 1/4-inch foot with the guide. And I'm using I think I got a blue thread in there just so you can see. So this is the most important part, besides all your tools being important. Let me kind of get those out of the way. You want to check for a 1/4-inch seam. You don't measure the seam that you make. You take 2 pieces of fabric. In this case, I took 2 3.5-inch squares. And I'm going to stitch them together using my 1/4-inch seam foot with the guide. And then I'm going to show you how you properly measure to know that you're getting your correct 1/4-inch seam. So I'm just going to put these two together, and I'm going to reach in front of you here. Well, no, I guess I can make it. I'm going to sew from over on the side. So when you sew, you know this hand is always going to stay on the fabric all the way through until there's no fabric. If you don't, your fabric's going to either pull over this way or that way. Have you ever had when you get to the end near your seam and then all of a sudden it veers off? Well, that's you. You're driving. So keep this hand, get in the habit of keeping this hand on the fabric until all the sewing is done. And you'll be a happier person for that. So I'm gonna, and you can see where I am. So I'm a little over on the side, but I'm gonna use, my eye is right here. Let's see if we can come in a little bit closer. Oh, let me adjust. There we go. My eye is looking along here to make sure that this is nice and straight as I come up to my guide. I don't want to be over here. I don't want to be over here. I want to keep it nice and straight, okay? Your job is not to look at the needle because the needle doesn't like to be stared at. So no looking at the needle, because by the time the needle stitches, it's too late. You're keeping right here, and it really is a very hard habit to break of looking at the needle. So don't feel bad if you can't help yourself, because we all do that. Okay, so my hand stayed there, I'm sorry if it was in your way, until I was done stitching. Okay, now let me put the camera back. Oh, let me just bring it down this way. There we go. So the first thing I'm going to do, in this case, I'm going to use my iron. I'm not going to use my roller because I want to make sure it's pressed when I do any measuring. So if I'm measuring a block or I'm measuring a part of a unit of a block, I am going to press it. I'm going to press it, not iron it. Okay? Press. Press, iron, no. And I'm going to stay on my seam. I don't need to be over here. I've already pressed that, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and bring my seam across, press, press. Now, I'm going to show you what most of us, me included, do, what I was talking about with the seam. Can you see how along this edge, there we go. See how I'm not straight? Okay? So that's not hanging on to the end. In my case, I couldn't see over there, but that's what happens if you don't hang on to it right to the end. You see how that we were nice and straight here, and then all of a sudden we just, we swerved, okay? So, we have a 3.5 inch piece and a 3.5 inch piece, and in my world, 3.5 and 3.5 equals 6.5. Yes, I know it equals 7, but remember we took a 1/4 inch from this fabric, 1/4 inch from this fabric, so it's a 1/2 inch. So 3.5 and 3.5 minus a 1/2 is 6.5. So when I look on my mat, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.5. That's how you know you have the right seam allowance. If I come back here and measure this seam allowance, that doesn't mean anything because you're not taking into account the thickness of the thread, the fold of the fabric, because there is going to be a little fabric taken up in that fold, just a tad, okay? So then if you need to adjust, that's how you would adjust. And I suggest it wouldn't hurt you to, when you sit down to a project that it's really important to do a 1/4 inch seam properly, do one of these little tests. Is there a waste of fabric? I guess so. But is your time worth as much as your fabric? I would think so. But if you sit there, it does two things. If you sit there and do this test, first of all, it kind of gets your brain into the, I got to have a 1/4 inch mode, so your brain's starting to get where it belongs before you get into your good fabric pieces that you cut so nice. And secondly, we don't sew the same way every day. So, depending on how our day is going, or which machine we're on, we always want to double check that because it's very important, because if you're off a little over 30 pieces in several blocks, you're going to be off 30 times whatever you were off. Now, if you are off, two things you need to check. First of all, make sure you cut right, because a lot of times it might not be your sewing. It might be that you didn't cut quite right. And again, don't use a giant ruler. If you're cutting something small, use a small ruler. I always say use the smallest ruler you can whenever you're doing your cutting. It just is a lot easier to handle. So that's our tips for today. And this video may seem a little short, but I'll warn you now that next month's block, we're going to be doing a lot of sewing. I believe I used my new favorite little I guess I'll call it a tool, because it's got a little magnet I can keep, because I usually only ever need 4 pins. So I keep some pins right there, and it's handy because you just kind of drop the pin and it stays right there. And it's got a little cutter here, so you'll get to see, and then your little threads and snips can go in there. But we're going to use this in next month's block, and that video is quite a bit longer. Excuse me. So I thought maybe this one could be a little shorter, because the next one's it is quite long. I think I sewed just about the whole block together with you, or some of the pieces. But anyways, we'll see you next time, and double check your tools. Make sure you have everything you need. And when you stop in at Angel's, make sure that you say, I watched the video about tools for the block of the month, and get a discount. So see you again next time. Thanks for joining me. Bye.